The logistics of the world's largest festival of democracy is indeed staggeringly mind boggling. We have 960 million electors, of whom 470 million women will soon elect 543 members of parliament by casting their ballots in one of the 1.2 million booths overseen by 15 million election officers across 28 states and 9 union territories in a multi-phase Lok Sabha election. Now, today we have the two main contesting groups, of which there is the well-entrenched NDA group, BJP-led 38 parties, and you have the fledgling group called the INDIA, 27 members, Congress bloc. But between the time of writing this column and talking to you, the BJD has already joined the BJP alliance, and therefore the process is very interesting. Now, the purpose of talking to you today is about the conduct of elections, and the primary responsibility, as per the Representation of People's Act, lies with the returning officers. The returning officers are usually the district magistrates in the constituency where the election is being held. Normally, a district magistrate is the returning officer, but sometimes you have very small districts in which the DM of the neighboring district could be the returning officer. And then there could be very large districts in which a DM is probably the returning officer for more than one candidate. Then we also have, in addition to returning officers, several election observers. You have general observers, we have expenditure observers, we have micro observers, we have sector magistrates, and we have 3.5 lakh additional members of the Central Armed Police Forces, that is the BSF, the CRPF, the ITBP, the SSB, which assist the local police, the state armed police, and the home guards in providing the security paraphernalia, guarding the ballot boxes, the treasuries, the strong rooms, and providing general protection. So it's a large exercise in logistics. That is from the government side. And then, of course, you have field reporters, we have commentators, we have background researchers, and now we have specialist agencies. You have Prashant Kishore's IPAC, you have Jarvis Consulting, we have Design Box, there's Rajaniti, there's Political Edge, there's Janmat Consulting, Inclusive Minds, and many more. Now, these specialist agencies advise candidates and parties about the strategic outreach of their election campaigns. Now, these agencies have done some great work in terms of understanding the booth level demographics, the constituency level demographics, and they assist the candidates and political parties in pitching their campaigns by coining the requisite slogans, by designing ads for the print media, for the social media, the wall graffiti, and they also ensure that the candidates can file their returns regarding expenditure, so that there's no disqualification on that count. Must mention here today that the stipulated amount for the Lok Sabha is 75 to 95 lakh rupees per constituency, while for the assembly it is 28 to 40 lakhs. Now you might wonder why this variance. That is because the size of the constituency varies. I mean, the constituency size in Lakshadweep, for example, is much smaller than, say, the Karol Bagh constituency of New Delhi. But these specialist agencies have taken over from the traditional foot soldiers, who are the members of the Students' Union, members of the Kisan Morcha, Mahila Morcha, trade unions, party workers. Earlier, they used to do all these things. Today, all this is being done professionally. And, in Hyderabad now, we also have startups which are helping candidates raise funds for the elections to crowdsource their campaigns. And some of the new political parties and some of the independent candidates are trying this. Not very successful so far, but that could be the future as we go ahead. Let's take a flashback. Let's talk about 1950s. That's the time when India is making the transition to a republic. The Constituent Assembly has notified the establishment of an election commission in November 1949. And in March of the following year, Sukumar Sen of the ICS, who was then Chief Secretary of West Bengal, was appointed as India's first Chief Election Commissioner. Let's also note that the Representation of Peoples Act came after the appointment of Sukumar Sen. The best description of the first elections comes to us from Ramchandra Guha, who writes, Nehru's haste in wanting India's first general election was understandable, but it was viewed with some alarm by the man who had to make the election possible. And this man, Sukumar Sen, according to Ramchandra Guha, is the unsung hero of Indian democracy, because it was the mathematician in Sen which asked the Prime Minister to wait. No officer of the Indian state, certainly no official, had ever taken such a stupendous task. The size of the electorate, even in 1950s, was 176 million. These were the people, citizens of India, 21 years and above. The important point to note is that 85% of them could not read or write. And therefore, it was a far more complex task because everything had to be put visually. So you had to design party symbols, ballot papers, separate ballot boxes, and polling stations had to be built. They had to be spaced out. And you need to train the polling officers as well, polling officers, presiding officers. Manuals had to be written. Voting had to be as transparent as possible to allow for fair play. And remember, this was also the first one nation, one vote election because the assemblies went to election at the same time. And this election happened in 68 phases. A total of 1,96,084 booths had been set up for 105 million voters, of which 27,527 booths were reserved for women because many women were parda nashin in those days. Although most of the voting took place in 52, the point to note is that the first voters of the Republic were in the Chini Tehsil in the Lahaul Spiti district of Himachal Pradesh, who voted in 1951 because in February and March, the weather in Himachal, that time the hills of East Punjab was, and the weather continues to be as it is. The weather used to be snowbound, and there was a lot of difficulties in free movement. Therefore, some elections, part of the elections took place in 51, but the majority of the elections took place in 52. The results were declared in 52, and that's why it's called the general elections of 1952. Now, there were 489 seats allotted across 401 constituencies. Now, remember, this was the time when we had multi-party, multi-seat constituencies. In fact, there were only 314 constituencies which elected one member each. There were another 86 constituencies which had two members, that is, one general category member and another seat reserved for the scheduled caste and the scheduled tribes. And in Bankura of West Bengal, we had a 3-member constituency because we had a general seat, a scheduled caste seat, and a scheduled tribe seat. Now, this happened only in the first elections. And by 1961, by the legislation called the Abolition of the Two-Member Constituencies Abolition Act, we started having one seat per constituency. Now, in 1952, of the 1949 candidates who contested, 489 were returned, but the strength of the Lok Sabha was supplemented by a nominated member from Andaman and Nicobar Islands. It was Reverend Richardson. He had instituted village councils and tribal councils, but elections were not started in Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And then we also had two nominations from the Anglo-Indian community because per Article 331, two seats were reserved for Anglo-Indians for the first 10 years, and this continued till the 104th Constitutional Amendment, which finally abolished these seats in 2019. The results of the first elections were a landslide victory for the Indian National Congress, which received 45% of the popular vote. They had 364 of the 489 seats, and Jawaharlal Nehru became the first democratically elected Prime Minister of the country. The second position was occupied by the Socialist Party. They had 11% of the vote, but they got 12 seats. The predecessor party to the Bharatiya Janata Party, which is the Bharatiya Jansangh, they got 3 candidates. 4 seats were taken by the Hindu Mahasabha and 3 by the Ramarajya Parishad. But these 10 members decided to make a block and accepted the leadership of Shyama Prasad Mukherjee. Now, I'd mentioned about Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Let me tell you about the second group of islands that we have in the country, which is Lakshadweep. So Lakshadweep was a part of the Malabar constituency till 1956 and became a union territory in that year after the States Reorganization Commission. But here too, the elections were held only in 1967 because in 57 and 62, Lakshadweep also had a nominated member of parliament whose name was K. Nalla Koya Thangam. And the third region in this country which did not have direct elections to the Lok Sabha was Jammu and Kashmir, because Article 81 of the Constitution, allowed that the elections from Jammu Kashmir would be indirect. That is through the members of the State Legislative Assembly. So direct elections to Jammu Kashmir started happening much later. Now, Sukumar Sen continued to be the Chief Election Commissioner during the second elections as well. And these were held between 24th February and 14th March 1957. The Congress improved its vote share to 47%. They won 371 of the 494 seats. And, the systems were getting in place, but the first booth capturing took place in 1957. And that took place in the Maithani Assembly constituency in the Begusarai district of Bihar. Now, this was a Bhumiyar belt, and the communists were very strong. But in this particular election, the Congress won. But in the subsequent election, the communists won the seat from this district. But booth capturing was not the name of the game in those days. Although it is clear that Section 123 of the RPA had laid down corrupt practices, and this was certainly a corrupt practice. But this definition was not exhaustive. And in any case, punishments and protocols about booth capturing had not been properly devised because the constitution makers had never thought that such perversion could also take place. And in the 60s and 70s, the practice became very prevalent in Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and West Bengal. In West Bengal, it used to be called booth management because the cadres would, queue up in the lines and, do the voting at such a snail's pace that a lot of voters would just go back frustrated. This is what used to happen. And we've talked about the first two elections. In the next talk, I'll start with the third Lok Sabha election, which took place in 1962. Thank you.